It will be out on the 31st of January and be communicated to the Commission. To sum up a bit, the main message is EU will reach climate neutrality with CCU. It cannot reach it without it. It's, as we've seen on the overall data, it is to play a role of 8% of global GHG emissions. In some sectors, it plays a way more important role. In technology as a whole, the technological part of emission reduction, CCU will play a role of 21%. So this is a huge part. We expect that there will be, in 2050, 320 megatons of CO2 captured. 46% will come from DAC, 23 from process emissions, and 23 from biogenic emissions, and 2% from CCU fuel combustion, and 6% from the remain fossil fuel emissions. 55% of the captured carbon will be used as feedstock to answer the non-fossil carbon demands. 30% of the total production of the main chemical building blocks, olefin, will be produced using captured carbon as a feedstock. At least 14 megatons of CO2, so 10% of the total CO2 stored, could be stored permanently in building materials, so through mineralization. 11% of emission reduction in transport will be coming from CCU fuels. And actually, this sector of CCU fuel will represent 17.5% of the global EU energy mix. Half of it will need to be imported, actually. And to conclude, the domestic production of CCU fuels and chemicals for the transport and industry sector will require up to 1,187 terawatt-hour, which actually represents approximately 22% of the model low-carbon emissions electricity production in the EU by that year. You have everything. You have the key messages. Now, what is next for this research? This exercise is meant to be updated on a regular basis. We've already planned a second version. This first version was very important to come out now because the policy are coming out the 6th of February from the EU Commission, and we wanted to give the CCU sector's input for these policies. But one of the main results actually is the creation of this web-based tool, open access database, which you'll be able to access, where you can actually modify the criteria and really deep dive into what we have in store for CCU industry as a whole. For the second version, we will focus on adding new CCU technological pathways in the model, adding the cost information, so being able to predict what will be the cost of the technology, prices, inflation, those kind of stuff, and their impact actually on the technological need, but also on the price of CCU and of CO2 for the different pathways. We also want to better quantify the impact of technological developments on planetary boundaries, as them. And what is not there, but this is my team, so I will say it, and this is also the reason why we did it. We want CCU to be more involved in EU policies. So far, no EU policy involves CCU directly. It is involved for Refuel EU, aviation, EU fuel maritime. So it's considered a technological pathway, but there's no legislation in CCU. And we know this is coming. We'll have to put it in the model, and we'll have to take more into account all the different policies where this is included. And that's it. Thank you very much. So of course, this is not my email address. Is there any question? Yes.
In English?
Or French, as you prefer.
Okay, I try in English. So sorry I missed the beginning of your presentation, but thank you. It was very clear. I just have a question about, you just said that you didn't take into account the cost information.
Yes.
So my question is, how did you reach 46% of direct air capture without taking into account the cost information? Because today it's like a real real issue for direct air capture. So I think it's a real a big value, a big share of CO2 capture, and I'm interested in how did you reach this
Of
amount?
course. So cost information will come in the second version of the report, which is due next year. Now, the idea of the model, the idea is to show how we can reach climate neutrality. So we have a vision that was presented in one of the first slides. I'll just put it back for you. Here, the vision. There were in the model some basic criteria. So to go back, we want to reach climate neutrality in the EU. We want to have the least impact possible on planetary boundaries. So on water consumption, material consumption. We want CCU to have a high impact on society while having the lowest electricity consumption possible. And we want EU energy sovereignty to be high. Considering these elements, the data shows that we'll have a need of 46% of DAC. Is there another question? I can also take EU policy questions. That's my specialty initially. Yeah.
Thank you for that presentation. Can you just say a few words about what's the CO2 from process emissions? What is that source of CO2? Can you describe it?
So CO2 from processed.
Yeah. Can you show the slide with the CO2 sources a little further? Oops. Yeah. Here.
Thank you.
Process emissions.
Yeah. In some industries, the process of producing steel or cement, for instance, releases CO2 that doesn't come from burning fossil fuel. It's the chemical reaction.
So those sources might be from fossil sources. This process emission CO2 is...
No, they're not. Because the chemical reaction produces CO2. It's not fossil. It's...
From the ground.
No, it's not. It's just when I'm producing steel, the chemical reaction releases CO2. So it comes from the chemical reaction. It's fossil CO2 is basically to power my plant, I need to have a fuel that is going to be coming from petroleum, for instance. That is fossil. This is a huge part that is super important because this is what we call also unabated. It cannot be compensated. It's always going to be there. And you need to find a solution for that too.
I guess the question behind my question is, if we do CCU with those sources of CO2, will the end product meet the requirement to be called like a renewable fuel or RFNBO, or are they renewables?
Depends on the legislation, and the whole work is actually to make sure that it is renewable or it is considered, let's not mix the names, but that process emissions are considered as renewable sources of CO2, because in the end you cannot avoid it and you'd rather have it reused than actually going in the atmosphere. But that's basically the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
Is there another question?
You just mentioned the policies at the European level. Is there any of this not considered at the European level as like carbon offsetting? Or a way to reduce emissions?
CCU as a whole is not covered in EU legislation. It's covered on legislation by legislation. If we consider fuels, for instance, for the maritime sector, you have a legislation that came out now that is called Fuel EU Maritime, and that says that basically we'll need to use CO2 to produce synthetic fuels. Producing synthetic fuels needs CCU, basically. We call them even CCU fuels. So it's there, but it's not, the technology as such is not included. There is also legislation for the aviation sector. It brings with very clear goals, data. So we know that synthetic fuels are going to play a huge part in the defossilization of the aviation sector, and CCU is to play a huge role there. Now, if we talk about other legislation, we have several coming up. At the moment, the Net Zero Industry Act is discussed. It's kind of the European response to the IRA, American Inflation Reduction Act, which sponsors all clean tech in the progressively at American level. I'm simplifying. And this is being discussed. Fuels are considered as strategic for the EU, so this will come with shorter time to get the authorization to build your plants. This will come with some funds, or at least preference of funds, but there's not really any money associated with these policies. So fuels are there for aviation, for maritime. Mineralization is considered in the sense that CCS is considered, and long-term storage is considered. So mineralization is there. Now the third pathway, chemical building blocks, is not there. And part of the work, because also is to make CCU as a whole considered as a technological path, because we will need huge investments that will spill over to all of these different paths. And that's it. At EU level, we also have coming up two different, one strategy coming up the 6th of February, Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, which specifically lists CCU. And then, and coming from there, we will have legislation, but they're not planned yet. And then we have the objectives in 2040. So basically, the EU voted to reach climate neutrality in 2050. We have a set of rules and goals for 2030, which was called Fit for 55. We want to reduce GHG emissions of 55%. And now the 6th of February, they're going to publish the objectives for 2040, which should be Fit for 90, because that's what they're going for, reducing GHG emissions of 90%. Any other question? CA.
Hello. There are very interesting figures in your presentation about chemicals from CCU.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, there is no regulation today for for chemicals. This is expected this year or coming years. How do you expect this regulation for chemicals, and how did you take into account this future regulation in your model?
So future regulations are not taken into account. They will be taken into account when they are voted. This is very simple reason for that. It's that you cannot, until the text is final, you don't know what is going to be the objective, and the model is going to change, and it makes no sense to have it there. When the Commission comes with a proposition, generally takes 2 years, maybe 3, with different institutions coming in and setting different objectives. We, of course, have them in mind. For some policies, actually, for instance, for CCU fuels, the objectives, the elements that are put in there are actually more ambitious than the policy that is already there, because we know that it's going to be needed to reach the objective. Otherwise, it's not possible. But for chemicals, it's not there yet. Do you have another question? I think there was a question here in the front.
Yes, thank you. I see that the CCU fuels have a major portion, a major part there. And I've participated in a conference late last year where from utilities and from technology leaders was a clear statement saying that actually it is more energy efficient and it's much less costly to burn instead normal fossil fuels and increase the share of CCS, which at the end has the same effect. You have less carbon emissions in the, let's say, in the atmosphere, but at lower cost and at lower energy footprint. Is that a true statement? I just don't know that. Yeah, but did you look at it?
It's always cheaper to change nothing.
Sorry, that was not saying change nothing. It
At
just simply
CCS.
said CCS instead. So increase your share of storage, what you're saying there.
Of course. So, we work on CCU. Well, I'm going to tell you CCS. CCS is needed. We expect that it will play a huge role, 35%. There are 2 elements here. First of all, some technologies in every pass, be it CCS or CCU, are not ready yet. So we don't know how it's going to come out. Second, we have a need for CO2 in many different industries. The thing is, I understand the point. In any case, now there is a legislation in the aviation sector. We need synthetic fuels. It's the law. It's there. So, be it efficient or not, that's what the industry will go for. It's not my mind. It's elected MEPs who voted for, and my opinion doesn't count in here. But yeah, they can change it. They have review clauses. They can actually consider, they can review everything. I think in every one of these legislation there is a review clause coming in. Now I think for modularization, and this is also what industry is asking for, they want clarity. They want to be able to do investment. So if we go back to counting on a revision, we're actually not making the investment that we know is needed for now, considering it is the law. Is it more efficient? We can discuss it together outside. I'm really happy to discuss it. CCS is super costly, as you said it. CCU is also super costly. We can check. Maybe, as was saying the lady, we need the cost criteria to be implemented in the model to come with a straight answer to that. It's a whole debate, but I hope it answers your question. Is there another question? Okay. Thank you very much for your attention. We have a booth over there. with actually so many of our members, CA, which was there asking questions and which will present also this afternoon, New Stark and Keymod, others. You can come and talk with us. There will be other CCU panels this afternoon. There's one at 3:20 and another one at 2. So they'll be in this room. Please come and join us. And yeah, have a nice day. Have a nice forum.